I'm here with Alexander Mercurs, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Alexander, let's talk about CrowdStrike, the firm that supposedly was working with the FBI and came to the conclusion that it was Russia that had hacked Hillary Clinton's email server. And looks like all of this is also one complete hoax. Maybe we can call this the CrowdStrike hoax now. Because during Roger Stone's case, during the discovery phase, they came up with some interesting discovery. Alexander, you want to explain exactly what's going on here? Because this is, the whole Mueller investigation is just literally falling apart. It's in complete pieces, the whole thing.
It is in complete pieces, as you absolutely rightly say. Now, Alex, can I just explain, first of all, who CrowdStrike is? CrowdStrike is this company that was contracted by the DNC to investigate what the DNC said were hacks of its computers. And CrowdStrike carried out those investigations. And on the 14th of June, that's 2 days after Julian Assange, in an interview on British television on the 12th of June, said that that WikiLeaks had emails of the DNC related to Hillary Clinton that he was going to publish. On the 14th of June, 2 days later, CrowdStrike came out with this report, which report alleged that the DNC computers had malware and that the Russians had inserted it. Now, alongside Christopher Steele's famous dossier, which made all the allegations of collusion, this report by CrowdStrike is the other key document of the whole Russiagate conspiracy theory. The Christopher Steele dossier was paid for by Hillary Clinton's campaign and by the DNC, using as an intermediary Glenn Simpson's company, Fusion GPS. The CrowdStrike report was also paid for by Hillary Clinton and the DNC, though on this occasion they did that openly. Now, the important thing to say is that the FBI, the country's law enforcement agency, the country's principal agency which carries out counter-espionage investigations, which on the 31st of July 2016 undertook an investigation, as it said, of Russian meddling in the US presidential election. It never examined the DNC computers. It never examined the original servers. It relied entirely on this report by CrowdStrike. And what Roger Stone's lawyers, through this discovery process, have been able to establish is that that report by CrowdStrike was never in fact completed, that the FBI based all its conclusions on an incomplete report provided by a private contractor paid for by Hillary Clinton and the DNC.
Yeah, I apologize. I think I said Hillary Clinton's email server was the DNC server. In all honesty, at this point, it's like one and the same. DNC and Hillary Clinton were pretty much the same exact organization. I mean, she was funneling money from the DNC to her campaign. The whole thing was...
And funneling money, funneling her own money into the DNC. Yeah, exactly. I mean, they were all working together with the objective of getting Hillary Clinton made the Democratic Party's candidate in the presidential election, and then ensuring that she would be president of the United States. And that is what those emails that WikiLeaks disclosed showed. You, as I remember, Alex, went to immense trouble in the summer of 2016 to ensure that readers of the Duran were properly informed of the contents of those emails. And disgracefully, that aspect of this affair has since been suppressed and forgotten.
Yeah, the real election meddling that no one ever talks about, at least in the establishment media, was the DNC and Hillary Clinton meddling in the Democrat primaries and essentially ripping off Bernie Sanders from getting the nomination. I mean, that is the real election meddling that took place, not this whole Russiagate hoax. But either way, Roger Stone during Discovery has now uncovered what I think you rightly said is huge news. I mean, because it destroys another foundational pillar of the whole Russia election hack, meddling, Trump collusion thing. I mean, outside of the dossier, I think the CrowdStrike was pretty much just as important as you could get to propagating this false Russia election meddling hoax.
Absolutely. Now, I mean, the point is, you brought up Robert Mueller earlier when you were speaking. I mean, the point to understand is that Robert Mueller, in his report, as his report makes clear, he investigated two things. He investigated the collusion allegations, which he did, let's be very clear about this, largely on the basis of Christopher Steele's dossier, even though he barely hit that fact. But he investigated those allegations and found that there was no evidence at all of collusion between Donald Trump or his campaign and the Russians to interfere in the presidential election of 2016. He also devoted half his report to discussing, quite inappropriately, even disgracefully, in my opinion, this entire theory that he has about Donald Trump obstructing justice, obstructing Robert Mueller's own investigations, of which, in my opinion, there is no evidence. But the one thing Robert Mueller never did, and it's quite clear from this disclosure process that we now have, that Roger Stone's lawyers have carried out, the one thing Robert Mueller never did is he never went back and looked at the evidence of the original foundation allegation, which is that there was a Russian hack of the DNC computers. Instead, what he did in two documents, the first was an indictment he published just before Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump were due to hold a summit in Helsinki, and again in his report was accept the CrowdStrike report, though he never makes it clear that it is the CrowdStrike report. He is accepting that there was a Russian hack of the DNC computers and construct, based on CrowdStrike's allegations, this elaborate theory that the Russians hacked the computers, stole the emails from the computers, set up this internet persona, Guccifer 2, and used that internet persona to transfer the emails to WikiLeaks. And in reality, there is a severe problem with that theory, which is that it doesn't fit with the timeline.
Alexander, there's two things that Robert Mueller did not do. And you touched upon, you explained the first, which is the DNC servers, and the fact that the FBI, to put it very simply, the FBI just looked at an image snapshot of what CrowdStrike said was the server information. So they never, oddly enough, they never actually saw the hacked server and never investigated the hacked server, which is absolutely astonishing. If you're talking about Russia meddling and destroying the United States democracy. So that's astonishing that they just take CrowdStrike, which is actually, I believe, a Ukrainian run, or at least the CEO or the founder is a Ukrainian guy as well who actually has CrowdStrike. So once again, all roads kind of go right back to Ukraine there. But maybe that's a whole nother video on another day. So he didn't look at the server, the DNC server. He just saw an image snapshot of the server. That's all they saw. And the second thing that he didn't see comes from this quote from the Mueller report. And I want you to broaden it out after I read you the quote. You're going to know exactly what I'm talking about, which is the other line of investigation that Mueller avoided. And here it is, Alexander. This is from the Mueller report. And I quote, "The office cannot rule out that stolen documents were transferred by intermediaries who visited during the summer of 2016. So, Alexander, he didn't look at the server that was supposedly hacked. And what's the second thing that he didn't do after this server was supposedly hacked by the Russians?
This is absolutely right. And that is a key sentence. It's buried on page 47 of Mueller's report. And what it says is that the office cannot rule out that it was intermediaries who physically came to WikiLeaks and provided what Mueller calls the stolen documents. In other words, the emails which WikiLeaks published, the DNC emails which WikiLeaks published. Now, to understand the importance of that statement, you've got to look at the whole theory of Russiagate, which has been accepted by the news media, by the intelligence agencies, and by Mueller. And you've also got to look at the timeline. So let me just take you firstly through the timeline. First, on the 12th of June 2016, Julian Assange announces that WikiLeaks has got emails, Hillary Clinton related emails. On the 14th of June, CrowdStrike, that's 2 days later, CrowdStrike announces that there is malware, there is Russian-based malware in the DNC computers. On the 15th of June, Guccifer2, this mysterious persona, which Robert Mueller alleges was created by the Russians, comes forward and claims responsibility for the hack. Now, please note that date, 15th of June, is when Guccifer2 appears on the scene. That is 3 days after Julian Assange has spoken. Now, please also note one further thing, which Robert Mueller confirms in his report. There is no evidence at all at this time, and the US intelligence community was unable to find any evidence of any contact between WikiLeaks and Guccifer2 at this time. On the 14th of July, that is a full month later, Guccifer2 transmits data to WikiLeaks. On the 22nd of July, that's 8 days after this transfer of data, WikiLeaks publishes the DNC emails. Now, what Mueller is suggesting is that this document transfer by Guccifer2, which happens on the 14th of July, a full month after Julian Assange has already said that he is in possession of the emails he's going to publish, that this document transfer by Guccifer2 on the 14th of July is the same documents that WikiLeaks published just 8 days later on the 22nd of July, leaving WikiLeaks just 8 days to check. I think it was what?
28,000, I believe, emails. Yeah.
WikiLeaks being an organization that is famous for checking the data it receives with extraordinary care. WikiLeaks being an organization that had had no prior contact with Guccifer2. I don't believe that. And what is incredibly interesting is if you read both the indictments that Mueller published against the 12 Russian officials and Mueller's report, he has to admit that the FBI, that the intelligence community of the United States do not know for a fact that it was the data that was published by WikiLeaks which was the data that Guccifer 2 sent to WikiLeaks on the 14th of July. And now, buried on page 47 of his report, you have that sentence you read out to me by Mueller, in which he demolishes the whole theory by admitting that the United States does not actually know how WikiLeaks obtained those emails, because it might have obtained them not from Guccifer 2, but in an entirely different way, from an actual courier physically bringing the emails in a thumb drive, in a USB stick, or whatever, to WikiLeaks. So it's a theory which Mueller admits is not true, which is not consistent with the timeline, and which Mueller admits, he cannot prove, which is not consistent with the timeline, and which he admits that there is this alternative theory, which is, you absolutely rightly say, Mueller himself never investigated.
So to summarize everything, Alexander, Mueller has no conclusive evidence whatsoever as to how WikiLeaks obtained those emails. So the whole Russia did it does not hold true whatsoever. And we have people like Bill Binney at VIPS who does make the claim, and Bill Binney is the number one expert on this stuff, the number one expert on all of these matters. I think he actually built the systems at the NSA.
Correct.
So he even says, and he conclusively points out, I believe in an article that he did about a year ago, that this was without a doubt a download via thumb drive. So he makes the case there.
Yes.
Either way, Mueller does not know conclusively. And we have, from the Roger Stone discovery phase of his court case, the revelation that Mueller just looked at a draft, the FBI just looked at a draft copy of the CrowdStrike assessment on a server that the FBI says was hacked, and Mueller says was hacked, which the FBI never actually looked at that server.
Indeed. So how can the FBI be so sure there was even a hack? Because bear in mind, as I understand it, the NSA, which is the intelligence agency which would presumably know, hasn't confirmed it. Now, Binney, who is its technical director, has actually said that if there was a hack, the NSA would have detected it. And the NSA has only given moderate confidence to these findings, which is less, considerably less, than certainty. But to come back to your first question, yes, Mueller has admitted, both in his indictment and in his report, you have to read them very carefully to see that. Well, he's implicitly admitted that the United States intelligence community does not actually know how WikiLeaks got hold of the DNC emails. And I would add that James Comey, when director of the FBI, in testimony he gave to the House Intelligence Committee on March 20th, 2017, in testimony he gave to the House Intelligence Committee, admitted that the United States does not, in fact, know how WikiLeaks got the DNC emails. So all this speculation, all this flood of writing that you read, including by Mueller, in his report, in his indictment, and which you read in the media and elsewhere, setting up this elaborate scheme involving Guccifer 2, is just a theory. The United States has no proof of it, and there are alternative explanations. And when you talk about William Binney, it's very important to stress that William Binney and VIPs, the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, are not just experts in this field, with Binney being arguably the number one experts. To the extent they could, without access to the original DNC servers, they did that which the FBI did not do. They actually carried out a forensic investigation, and they established that the data could not have been removed by a hack. And Alex, computers are the things you understand.
The speeds, when Binney looked at the speeds, he said it was downloaded. Yeah,
it was downloaded.
To put it simply,
This is what you understand. Now, it could not have been done via a hack. That it is physically impossible.
Exactly.
I would add, Binney has been saying that now for I think about a year, and I have not seen a single official of the United States government come forward and say that he is wrong and how he is wrong. Instead, we have this theory all the time. I mean, Robert Mueller doesn't say anything about Binney's theory at all. He certainly doesn't refute it.
Yeah, I mean, Binney's, he hasn't been interviewed by anybody, hasn't been brought in to testify to Congress, nothing like that. Oh. And even in the mainstream media, the establishment media, I think the only person that has given Binney airtime was Tucker Carlson. Who else? I mean, Tucker Carlson's probably had the best coverage out of anybody as far as the Russiagate hoax goes. And I think he actually has had Binney on a couple of times to explain it. He's been the only one that has had Binney on. Yes. Alexander, I have to ask you one final question on this, because the entire Mueller investigation, Mueller's entire team, what a bunch of incompetent, just hacks, all of these guys. This has been a 2-year shit show, because Alexander, Mueller and his whole team, this is a team of prosecutors, 16, 17, 18, supposedly of the best prosecutors, handpicked by Mueller, with unlimited power to do anything they want, to take this investigation into any direction they want, unlimited resources. As a prosecutor, didn't Robert Mueller and his team have an obligation to save the United States democracy from the evil Russians and from the evil Donald Trump? Didn't Robert Mueller have an obligation to go down the line of the DNC server hack, investigate that server? Didn't he have an obligation to actually physically investigate that server? And number two, didn't he have an obligation as a prosecutor to investigate the fact that it may have not been a hack, but it was actually delivered to WikiLeaks via an intermediary, a person? He had Julian Assange in London. He could have interviewed him. Assange was more than willing to speak. But Mueller had unlimited power and money and finances to go down these two roads. He didn't. He just took the lazy way out, and he just pushed the Russia narrative.
Yes. Well, to answer your question,
the GRU narrative, and Alexander, please educate everybody on GRU is not even the correct term.
Yes. Can I just remind you again, Alex? Mueller was not just a prosecutor. He was also an investigator. If you look at the terms of his original appointment, he was appointed to investigate and find the truth. Now, there is legal precedent that a police investigator is required to follow through all reasonable leads and look at all proper evidence. He is required in this situation to examine the DNC servers, since Mueller himself accepts the possibility that WikiLeaks obtained this evidence via couriers. He is under a duty to speak to Julian Assange and to interview WikiLeaks if these people are prepared to speak to him and if it is within his power to speak to them. Mueller did none of those things. What Mueller did instead is, as you absolutely rightly said, he accepted this incomplete, partisan, Democrat-paid CrowdStrike report. He carried out an extraordinary investigation of the collusion allegations, in which he makes every single contact between Donald Trump and his campaign and anybody even remotely connected to Russia appear suspicious, but is able in the end to find out nothing. And he then concludes with this extraordinary academic discussion about obstruction. That was not a report intended to discover the facts and to set them out clearly so that we all know the truth. That was a partisan hit job intended to discredit Donald Trump, help the Democrats, and prepare the groundwork for Donald Trump's impeachment.
Well said, Alexander. You know, the part that pisses me off the most is that he sat there, Mueller sat there going after guys like for money laundering in Ukraine that had nothing to do with Trump and had everything to do with Obama. And he sat there going after guys like Manafort and Carter Page and Roger Stone and Michael Flynn and all these guys, when he could have walked down the damn street to the DNC headquarters and looked at the damn server.
Exactly. I mean, that's where it all began. That's where the whole Russiagate story supposedly started. I mean, you and I have our doubts about that. I mean, we know that all sorts of things are going on with George Papadopoulos many months before. But anyway, in theory, if you accept the official version, it all begins with a hack, an alleged hack of those servers. The very first thing you do is you look at the evidence to see whether or not the claim that there has been a hack is true. You don't go and accept the evidence of some private expert paid for by the DNC itself, which has an obvious motive to set out the DNC's own version of the story. Of course you go down the road. And of course you also interview the single most important witness in this matter, who is none other than Julian Assange. And Julian Assange made it perfectly clear that he was prepared to speak to Mueller. He made it perfectly clear that he was prepared to speak to Comey. He was in discussion with the FBI in February 2017 about giving evidence that might help the FBI to establish the truth about what actually happened during 2016. And in fact, it was Comey who brought those discussions to a stop, and it was Mueller who never followed up on them.
And CrowdStrike as a firm is pretty questionable. They've done some stuff like this in the past. I mean, we have to do a whole other video on this, Alexander, but I believe it was something like they implicated Russia. This was a whole nother deal, and they tried to implicate Russia on another hack, and it turned out to not pan out either. I mean, they're not, we've been down this road before with CrowdStrike, and I think it warrants perhaps another look at what they've been up to and perhaps another video.
Indeed. So, I mean, CrowdStrike got very badly burnt when they claimed that it was the Russians during the 2014 Donbass war had been able to hack into Ukrainian systems and making them vulnerable to Russian artillery attacks. And the Ukrainians said this is absolute nonsense. It was the Ukrainians themselves who contradicted what CrowdStrike was saying. But CrowdStrike said all of that with the same confidence that they've said that it was the Russians who hacked the DNC computers. And as we now know, thanks to the hard work of Roger Stone's lawyers, they weren't even able in the DNC case to finish their own report.
Yeah.
And there's no explanation for that, by the way.
Did you explain the GRU thing?
Yes, let's do that.
Because I kind of went off on the fact that Mueller
Yeah,
uses GRU
yeah, yeah.
throughout
This
his
is
whole
some,
report, which is actually wrong to begin with, and that just shows
yeah,
how incompetent
yes.
that the
I
whole
mean,
Mueller team is.
this is one of the most bizarre things, actually, because both in that indictment that he published just before Putin and Trump were going to meet, and his report, he claims that the hack of the DNC computers was carried out by 12 Russian intelligence officers. And he gives the names of these people who he alleges carried out this hack. And he also alleges that these 12 Russian intelligence officers work for a Russian intelligence agency that he names as the GRU. The trouble is, there is no Russian intelligence agency currently in existence called the GRU. There was an intelligence agency, a Russian intelligence agency called the GRU, in existence in the Soviet period. When the Soviet Union broke up, the GRU was reorganized and its name was changed to GU. It is now the GU of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, previously being the GRU of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces. GRU stands for Main Intelligence Directorate. GU stands for Main Directorate. That wasn't, by the way, just a name change. The name was also changed because, as I said, there was a significant amount, apparently, of internal reorganization. Now, some people will say, well, this is a trivial thing. It's not important. But the indictment that Mueller published is a legal document. It's supposed to be produced to a court. Mueller's report is also a legal document. It is produced by the Department of Justice. And it is bizarre that Robert Mueller gets the name of the intelligence agency he is supposed to be writing about wrong. And it suggests to me extremely sloppy work on the part of Mueller and of his team. And it does make me wonder, frankly, whether, given that he made such an obvious and incomprehensible mistake, why anybody assumes that any other part, either of that indictment or of the report, is reliable.
Yeah, well, what an incompetent tool Robert Mueller is. I mean, just pure
Well,
incompetence.
it is incompetence, and it's also capped by even greater incompetence. I mean, all you need to do is do a Google search of GRU. It doesn't take any time. You don't need special knowledge of Russia, and you find that out. And yet, no one in the massed ranks of the media in the United States or Britain or elsewhere seems to have done that and to have pointed out to this obvious error. By the way, it's not the only example of errors like that appearing. In the Steele dossier, there is a very important bank that is mentioned, and Steele gets its name wrong, the spelling of its name wrong. He spells it Alpha Bank, ALPHA, and it's actually Alpha Bank, ALFA.
Yeah.
I mean, he gets the name of the bank wrong. And again, all these great intelligence agencies, the FBI, were actually applying for FISA warrants on the basis of this document, supposedly from a British intelligence officer who was familiar with Russia and doesn't even know how to correctly spell the name of one of Russia's most important banks. And as I say, it's very weird. And it does suggest to me that ultimately these people don't really know very much about Russia and aren't very interested in Russia. What they are interested in is telling a spy story, and a spy story that they can then use to delegitimize Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't even know that Russia didn't have a consulate in Miami.
Well, there's
So,
another
I
one.
mean, that's about as simple a Google search as it gets.
There's another one, or that they mixed up the fact that, funding was being provided by the Russians in the United States through their consulates for Russians to vote in their own elections.
That's right.
And this was somehow mistaken for funding being provided to interfere in the US's elections. I mean, bizarre things like this. And as I said, there's never any real explanation of these mistakes. But, in Mueller's case, certainly, as you correctly say, he has infinite resources behind him. He's got the entire US intelligence community behind him. He's got the FBI behind him. He should at least get the name of the Russian intelligence agency he's writing about and issuing indictments against its officers. He should at least get the name of that agency right. And he doesn't.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They have no problem, though, collecting the 30 million paycheck that they got. This whole team, what was allocated to the Mueller investigation. So for 30 million, my God, talk about not getting value for money.
Well, there you go. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
My God. All right. This was a long one. We were going at it for about 35 minutes, Alexander. All right.
Well, it's complicated.
It's a lot to explain, yeah.
It's very complicated. But, can I just say something which is, I think, important? When people are trying to mislead, things become complicated. It's when people are telling it as it is, when they're telling the truth, that it becomes simple.
You don't need 400 pages of a Mueller report to get to the bottom of this.
Of course not. Absolutely not.
If anyone was overseeing Robert Mueller and his team, they would just ask basically the questions that we have been bringing up in this video. Why didn't you investigate the server? Why didn't you go and take a look at that server? Forensic. Look at that server. Yeah. And why didn't you talk to Julian Assange? Why don't you just ask him where the hell he got those emails from?
Exactly. So simple. So obvious. And then we wouldn't be doing 35
It is, after all,
videos.
about protecting America's democracy, isn't it? I mean,
well, that's what we're told. That's what exactly what they say all the time. But look what a complete mess of a job they made of it. And I have to say, it seems to me that was not incompetence, actually. That was deliberate.
It was deliberate. Yeah.
Because they wanted to discredit Donald Trump and his campaign and delegitimize his election victory.
Exactly. Well put. Let's end it on that note.